We are very pleased to welcome everyone at this event. The recent developments in Iran from different perspectives here at Aula Radboud University and online.
The death of Mahsa Amini in the police custody has made huge developments inside the Iranian society and outside its borders. We are going to answer the following questions today.
The Islamic Republic, yes or no? What political system do Iranians prefer? Separation of religion from state or a religion-based government? What is the Iranian favorite flag? Lion and sun flag, tricolor flag, or just the current flag?
How are women shaking the pillars of the Islamic Republic of Iran? What are they going through in their battle? Who are their allies inside the country and outside its borders?
How can a united coalition be formed by the oppositions to fulfill the shared political goals of Iranians?
What are the impacts of the recent developments on the future of the EU and the world? These questions will be addressed by our speakers today, and after a short break, we'll answer your questions in the panel discussion. We'll end this event by Persian music.
We would like to remind you that throughout this event, taking photos and recording videos are strictly forbidden. We also appreciate it if you please keep your cell phones silent. Thank you very much.
We are going to invite Dr. Pooyan Taimi Arab, our first speaker, to deliver his lecture. Dr. Taimi Arab is an assistant professor at the Department of Philosophy and Religious Study at Utrecht University and a member of the Utrecht Young Academy. Dr. Taimi Arab will talk about the main question of Islamic Republic, yes or no. He'll also elaborate on some of the latest research results of Gammon Institute.
Thank you. I'm trying to get my slide up. Does it? It'll come. Okay. Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me and for being here during the weekend. So, there it is. Yeah, my talk's title, Iran's Revolutionary Juncture, suggests that Iran is at a juncture of world historical importance. World historical because woman life liberty can become a national motto of the Iran of the future in remembrance of the first time a nation called for revolution in the name of women's rights. At Gammon, the group for analyzing and measuring attitudes in Iran, we strive to do quantitative research that answers whether these calls are indeed nationwide and represented by all demographic groups. And today, I'm going to discuss results of the past years to clarify the nationwide perspective and also its diversity. Now, let me begin with the general picture. The general picture matters because we understand freedom in a democratic sense, meaning general self-determination. This conception of freedom means, exemplified in, for example, Rousseau's social contract and the revolutions of the Enlightenment, that the voice of God is no longer represented by a king, or as in the Islamic Republic, by a jurist who claims to represent God's voice on earth. Rather, the voice of God should be transferred to the people. And this general voice is what is sacralized, also in modern contexts, and which can be observed today in the Iranian people's sentiments of sociability and in their unity in opposition to the Islamic Republic. Let me see. Should I just say next slide or? Yeah, I can do it, okay. So Gammon's first significant attempt to estimate the immeasurable general will of Iranians through a large-scale anonymous digital poll was in the spring of 2019. This simple survey asked whether Iranians would vote for the Islamic Republic in a free referendum 4 decades after the revolution. Of all respondents, 173,000 were adults living in Iran. After weighting, using the demographic variables of sex, age, education, province, rural-urban distribution, as well as one political variable, who they voted for in the 2017 presidential elections, the results revealed that around 80% of the target population would vote no in a free referendum on the Islamic Republic as such. Now, we learned from these data that Iranian society is politically divided, but not polarized. The ratio between the regime's sympathizers and opponents was respectively 2-to-8. Since 2019, the general image changed only slightly. In subsequent surveys on topics such as religion, the death penalty, international relations, and political systems, we found a roughly similar ratio of regime opponents and proponents. Now, if we want to support democratization, it's essential to have an idea of the general will, but the general will can regress into majoritarianism if it doesn't respect the society's different forms of diversity. This is where, next to democracy, the concept of liberalism comes into play. Now, with liberalism here, I mean specifically political liberalism, which since its development in the 17th century, understood the diversity of opinions, especially diverse religious opinions, to be a permanent feature of a free and equal, tolerant society. The source of inspiration for this way of thinking comes mainly, of course, from the tradition associated with thinkers like Locke, who argue that religious toleration should be institutionalized as an equal civil right. It is in this view not the diversity of opinions that is problematic or a challenge. The challenge is to overcome intolerance. And it's intolerance, not diversity, which leads to the persecution of those who don't want to be what the Islamic Republic wants them to be. Now, after Gammon conducted its 2020 religion survey with about 40,000 respondents who were at the time living inside Iran, many people were pleased with the colorful diagram that shows Iran's religious diversity. But there's still much work to be done. We need to carefully interpret and unpack these figures rather than take them at face value. So here's an example of a result that has not been published yet. This table graph shows what people of different religious persuasions believed about the separation of religion and law. These findings illuminate a substantial discrepancy between Shia and Sunni Muslims and all other groups' views on religion's establishment in the state. For example, let's zoom in on the people who identified themselves as Zoroastrians. You see that in the middle. Let's call them survey Zoroastrians. So they comprise not just the small ethno-religious community of Zoroastrians, but more so people who feel that Zoroastrianism is the authentic and ancient religion that distinguishes the concept of Iran. Now, from these people, 83% majority of these so-called survey Zoroastrians, compared with 97% of atheists, 86% of Sufis, 61% Christians, reported believing that religious prescriptions should be excluded from legislation, even if the religious hold a parliamentary majority. So they favor secularism. The numbers indicate that only Shia and Sunni groups reported significant support for basic political principles of the Islamic Republic, and even this explicit support was in a minority in 2020. So 35% and 33% respectively, right? So if you look at the top, you see that the Shia and Sunni are divided on political secularism, right? There's not one view that they have. So of the Sufis, who constituted a third Muslim category, 85% dissented from political theocracy. So clear difference with them. Thus, both survey Zoroastrians and Sufis fall between the more radical stance atheists, who 97% supported secularism, and the more moderate Christians, only 61%. We also found that survey Zoroastrians exhibited much less trust in the political system than Shia Muslims do. 40% of the survey Zoroastrians said that they did not vote in 2017 during the presidential elections, similar to 47% of atheists and 43% of Christians who said they did not vote, whereas only 10% of Shia Muslims said that they did not vote in 2017. Now, we can take a similar explorative perspective when analyzing preferences regarding political systems. Rather than assuming to know what the different Iranian groups want, let's see what this data can tell us if we unpack different demographics groups' preferences. Our February 2022 survey on political systems, based on a sample of around 17,000 adults in Iran, showed that Iranians aren't just religiously diverse, they also hold different opinions about regime types. When we asked about their preferred regime type, after weighting, right, these are weighted results, 34% chose a secular republic, 22% the Islamic Republic, 19% a constitutional monarchy, and 3% an absolute monarchy. Also, remarkably, over 21% declared that they are not sufficiently informed to answer this question. Now, if we compare these results, with the answers given to the question whether respondents approve of the chant Reza Shah, bless your soul, Ruhed Shad, Reza Shah, Ruhed Shad. I'm sorry I didn't have time to translate this, but I'll explain it. We see that, yes, as expected, those who support a monarchical system are more likely to support Reza Shah, Ruhed Shad, Reza Shah, bless your soul, with around 90% approval. That's to the left, the blue one. Right? So there are monarchists who also support this chant. That makes sense. But, and this is important to take seriously, also those who said they support a secular republic have a favorable view of Reza Shah. It appears as 60% approved of the same chant. Let's take another example. This time the question about the national flag. The February 2022 survey showed that there's a majority preference for a flag with a symbol, especially the lion and sun symbol. But here too, when we cross the results, we see that things aren't so black and white as is sometimes assumed. Yes, monarchists have a stronger preference for this flag than Republicans. But a significant majority of those who said that they support a secular republic also favor the flag with a lion and sun. So you can see that, you can read it here. And we can break it down even more precisely. If we look only at the people, so this is just one example of many that you could produce with this data, who identified as Zoroastrians. We find that, as expected, people who say they are Zoroastrians, who claim that, overwhelmingly prefer a flag with a lion and sun. But we also find that a significant group of them prefer a secular republic. Right? This data on survey Zoroastrians. Now, what's my point with these examples? For years, we have relied too much on a static categorization of Iran's different religious and political groups. On the other hand, in fields such as cultural anthropology, there's the tendency to go completely the other way, to conceptualize people's identities as so fluid that nothing decisive can be said about social patterns at all. Instead, I believe that data such as Gamon's help us nuance understanding of Iranian society, its diversity, without denying the direction of the general will. I know that many people here and online are curious to hear about the results of our December 2022 survey on the protests. These will be published in about 10 days. And I can say that this time we gathered a very large sample, 150,000 completed samples from inside Iran, and another 50,000 completed samples from outside Iran. Now, this survey, fortunately, I can already say that it confirms our previous results on religion. We asked about religion this time again, and on political preferences. And the results also confirm widely discussed changes in Iranian society. We see a radicalization of those who oppose the Islamic Republic. We see an increased sense of brotherhood in questions such as on the importance of friends. And also, respondents overwhelmingly expressed the hope that the revolution will succeed, that it will be a revolution. Now, if this revolution is indeed to succeed, all of us in Iran, in diaspora, should consider the basic maxims of democracy and political liberalism. First, that the people have a right to determine themselves democratically. And secondly, that diversity is a permanent feature of a free and equal society. Only the oppressive use of state power can attempt to eliminate human diversity. In contrast, when people's conscience can grow uninhibited, the diversity of opinions flourishes too, right? It's a product also of a free society. It's not just a given. And even if we sometimes despair, all of us have the right to hope for a better and common future. But given our diversity, we should set aside forever the hope that one group may overcome all others. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tamimi Arab, for your educative and informative lecture. Now, we would like to invite Dr. Parvaneh Hosseini to join us from the US. Dr. Hosseini is an Iranian feminist researcher and organizer at Worcester State University, Massachusetts. Good morning, Dr. Hosseini, and we are all ears to listen to you.
Hello, thank you very much. First, let me ask you if you are going to manage the PowerPoints or it is me.
Perfect.
We are good?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk about the recent developments in Iran from a gender-based perspective. 4 months ago, in September 2022, a series of protests spread in Iran with the slogan of Women, Life, Freedom. Many media channels, such as CNN, described them as more widespread than earlier protests in 2009, known as the Green Movement, 2017 and 2019. The protest erupted as the result of the murdering of a 22-year-old Iranian Kurdish woman named Mahsa Jina Amini, who was in custody of the so-called morality police for not wearing the proper hijab in accordance with government standards. In the protest after Mahsa Amini's death, women demonstrators removed their hijab, burned their hijab, and cut their hair as acts of protest. The protest lasted for months and months under state's violent suppression. Let us go still 1 month further back to get some background of what happened. 1 month earlier, in July, a 28-year-old woman named Sepide Rashno was arrested after footage of her objecting a state-connected woman harassing her on a bus over improper clothing. That was circulated online. She was taken to a hospital with internal bleeding, which was a sign of torture shortly after her arrest. She appeared on Iranian state television on July 30, wearing a headscarf to give an apology and a kind of forced confession. In the footage, Rashno looked pale and has dark circles around her eyes. Now, let us go now 44 years back. Before the Islamic Revolution in 1979, there was no law that instructed women what to wear. Many women still wore chador or headscarves, but many others did not, particularly younger generations. The 1979 Islamic Revolution introduced the idea of hijab law. The hijab law faced objections by women, which I will get back to later. But let's review the role and significance of hijab as a sign or symbol from which aspects at the time first, from the different aspects. The question is if hijab is culture, religion, or it is political. If we consider hijab as a sign in the modern era, hijab has been discussed many times from both traditional and political dimensions. From the traditional points of view, the hijab is a sign of following the Islamic commandments that a woman's body must be covered from a man's view in order to preserve religion and faith. From the political point of view, hijab is a symbol of political Islam, which became popular, especially from the 1970s onwards. First in the Middle East countries, such as Egypt, Lebanon, Iraq, Turkey, and Iran, and then in Western countries. From this point of view, the woman wearing hijab represents the Islamic society in the public space. It is during this time, I mean 1970s, when hijab became political and a political symbol. It is through this time when Islamic revolution happens in Iran, and it is in this socio-political atmosphere when hijab becomes compulsory in the newly established Islamic Republic of Iran. However, it is important to notice that later in 1990s, Islamic clothing itself stepped into the world of consumerism and capitalism and fashion, which added another aspect, or can say challenged that idea of political Islam represented in hijab, which is not the topic of our discussion today. And in this slide, you can see on the right, there are the women. It is the women's sport soccer team before 1979 revolution, which, as you can see, there is no kind of like Islamic enforcement. And on their left is a woman athlete who attended Olympics representing Iran. As you can see, she becomes, with her hijab, and I mean, she equals the hijab, and she becomes the flag of Islamic Republic of Iran. That is how Iranian women, through their hijab, became, the tools of Islamic Republic for their propaganda to show how Iranian women represent by their hijab the whole society, the whole country. Women's status in Islamic Republic is not just about hijab. Mandatory hijab, along with all other kinds of gender equality in family law and much more, which I go back to it later. Gender discrimination and gender segregation are all the issues that women have been dealing with during 44 years of Islamic Republic. The objections, from the very beginning, many women objected against mandatory hijab. On March 8, 1979, thousands of Iranian women marched in the streets protesting the idea of imposing hijab. But those women did not receive enough support in the Islamic revolutionary atmosphere of the time, mostly because of the meaning of hijab at that time, which we reviewed. So hijab became obligatory for all Iranian women from April 1983. After the Iran-Iraq war, that took almost 1 decade and pushed back civil political activities in Iran, gradually more and more campaigns were generated and practiced by Iranian women, including 1 million signature campaign and anti-hijab campaigns, which mostly Masih Alinejad was initiating, including My Stealthy Freedom, White Wednesdays, and My Camera, My Weapon. In 2017, a woman named Vida Mowahed simply stood up on a power stand, took off her scarf, tied it to a stick, and by this act objected publicly against mandatory hijab. And it became like a chain. Many other women did the same act, and that was another kind of like women's battle against mandatory hijab. Meanwhile, no administration, including conservatives like Ahmadinejad or reformists like Rouhani, made any considerable positive change in women's issues. Discriminations against women kept on at various aspects and levels, including family law, such as marriage, divorce, child custody, and heritage, economical aspects such as employment and welfare, political aspects such as women ministers in the administration, public space freedom such as entering stadiums, passport law, bicycle riding, etc. Many of these issues, like entering a stadium, became iconic and represented the battle between women and the patriarchal system in general. While women had some hope on reformists first and supported them for several administrative rounds, they became more and more disappointed by them, especially during Rouhani's terms, when he compromised women's rights against the promises he made in his presidential campaigns and tried to hide behind the gesture of negotiations over the nuclear deal. Signs of the end of hope to reformists were clearly seen in 2017 protests, which was almost the same time of the act of the first revolution street girl, Vida Mowahed, and reached its peak in November 2019 protest. One of the main slogans 2017 was Islah Talab Usulgara Dige Tamum Majara, which means reformists, conservatives, this is the end of it. Your era is done. Women played leading roles in these protests, and state media attempted to highlight this aspect of the protest also. The 2021 presidential election was another proof of the end of any hope to either reformists or conservatives, because there was a meaningful drop in participation of people in elections. They didn't vote. Okay, now let us go back to summer 2022. The satisfaction with the system and the confrontation of mostly women with the system was reflected and manifested in the way the morality police called Gasht Irshad attempted to control women and the way women play their roles. And as we reviewed, women resisted in various ways, as a number of women rights activists, including me, published in a statement on the days right before Sepideh Rashno was arrested and tortured. This is a part of our statement at the time. From the March 8, after 1979 revolution, this is a women's struggles going on to regain their freedom in the streets, to the loss of jobs due to saying no to the mandatory hijab, to Homad Arabi's protest self-immolation, to efforts to change the law, such as 1 million signature campaign, efforts to raise awareness, efforts to rejecting the mandatory hijab and removing it in the streets individually, and in hijab protest campaigns such as Masih Ali Nejad campaigns, to face-to-face encountering with the morality police patrols, and all kinds of creativity, courage, wisdom, and resistance and resilience. This is when Jina revolution happens. This is when Sepideh Rashno, which I spoke about it, objection, struggle, arrest, torture, forced confession with tortured face happened. At this time, people, women and men, who were already dissatisfied with the whole political system and felt overwhelmed, humiliated, and threatened, observed a member of them, that is Mahsa Amini, is beaten up to death by the Islamic morality police. This is a time when nation identify itself with Mahsa Amini and unites against the corrupted dictatorship that has been torturing them for the whole 44 years of its existence. This is a time when women of all walks of life in Iran rise and announce enough is enough. And men from Kurdistan to Tehran, to Baluchistan, to Gilan and Mazandaran, to Lorestan, to Khorasan, and all four corners of country stand along with women and chant Marg bar dictator, death to the dictator.
Dr. Hosseini, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, and no to Islamic Republic. The word woman is an inclusive word in the sense that it represents women from all walks of life. Also, LGBT community had some more visibility in this movement. It goes beyond sex and unites men with women. It unites Iranians from all countries, Iranians of diaspora to Iranian in Iran. It unites women of the world with women of Iran. And it also inspires progressive figures, and they announce their solidarity with Iranian people in their protest. I suggest a tool of analysis that is the panopticon, Foucault's panopticon, which is a model prison. Foucault uses a metaphor of tools of the disciplinary society. At the periphery of the panopticon, this is like a prison. At the periphery of the panopticon is a circular structure. At the center, a tower with wide windows that opens onto the inner side of the ring. The structure on the periphery is divided into cells, each with 2 windows, facing the windows of the tower, the other facing the outside, allowing an effect of backlighting to make figure visible with the cell. All that is needed then is to place a supervisor in a central tower and to shut up in each cell a prisoner who is constantly visible from the tower.
Thank you, Dr. Hosseini. We need to switch to the next speaker. Apologies for breaking you at this point.
Oh, okay, let me finish this. So this was how Iranian government was controlling women and men, And when women, I speak about torture later, and women, by removing their hijab, they brought down that tower which was looking at them all the time. If you allow me later, I will speak about a little bit about how can citizens of the world support Iranian protest. Thank you.
Thank you. We would need to switch the next speaker, but we really appreciate your presentation today. Thank you, everyone. And now we are going to continue our lecture with Ms. Dehban. Ms. Dehban is a PhD candidate at Rotterdam School of Management, Erasmus University, and will be sharing part of her PhD dissertation with us today. Ms. Dehban, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, friends and family who make the effort to come out on a Saturday afternoon here with us. Thank you so much. I will start with providing a little bit of background about myself and how I got to this subject, and how my experiences throughout the years have influenced the presentation and the research that I've got into. I called the title of this presentation The Art of Coalition Building. And I hope at the end of this presentation, you take away a few points that how you can apply the art of coalition building in your own communities. Yes, so there will be a brief introduction about my work and the catalyst that I have identified in my research in order to accelerate the process of coalition building and the challenges that we face throughout this process, and what could be the potential way forward for us. So as you can see, I'm a Dutchified Iranian. I was born and raised in Iran and moved here in 2005. This is my family. I have two sons, half Dutch, half Iranian, and they couldn't be here. They really love it to come with me to protest or to events. But my older son, Jesso, he had a hockey game today, and he's the goalie, and he couldn't let down his friends. So everybody is back home, but they really wanted to be here and show their support for the movement and the revolution that is going on in Iran. I have an associate degree from Iran in applied mathematics and computer sciences. And if you talk to any Iranian, you will figure out that most of us, if not all of us, go to applied sciences and physics. We have an exception, but you were not born in or raised in Iran. So it's a very common field. There is a hierarchy of education in Iran. If you are smart, you go to science. If you're not smart, you are sent to humanities, which is a very interesting approach to see how the society has been raised in the past generations, past 40 years, that how we have been brainwashed on the subject. From my first education, when I entered university, I got expelled because I kissed a girl, and I was spared from prosecution because the person who was in charge of making a decision to send me to police and the morality police or just expel me, he said, "You wear your hijab very well, so I spare you." So that's the level that from the very beginning, despite the efforts of my parents to raise us absolutely apolitical, I was already the living example of personal is political. So that was for me the starting point of subconsciously being into politics. And I moved to the Netherlands. I was very fortunate to get accepted at University College Utrecht, where I studied completely the opposite side of science because that was my true passion. And I did sociology, anthropology, and psychology with a minor in philosophy. And my research at this stage was interviewing widows of war between Iranian women who were widowed or during the Iran-Iraq war over the 8 years, or they lost their father or they lost their brother, a sort of a male figure in their life, to see how did they cope with the loss of a family member, a male figure in their life, because it's very important in Iran as a woman, you're owned and you're taken care of by a man, a male figure in your life. And if you don't have it, then somebody else has to play that role. So how do you cope with this? And interestingly enough, one of the mechanisms that these women have developed and used was to redefine their identity as part of a collective. And instead of being just a widow on their own, they became widows of war together. And if we make a comparison to what is happening now in Iran, that collective identity is also applicable to what people are going through, that the people who lost their child, they go to the funeral of somebody else who lost their child, and then 40 days later, they go to the other person, and every day there is a funeral, and this collective identity has strengthened this revolution to the next level, basically. For my master's, I did, again, at Utrecht University, which cemented my life in politics. I did women's studies, comparative women's studies in culture and politics. And for that, my research was on status of women, particularly on the convention, the UN convention, CEDAW, in Iran. Why Iran is among the 5 countries who hasn't signed this convention. Interestingly enough, United States is also one of them. But my question was why Iran hasn't specifically signed this. And I interviewed a wide range of Iranians in politics, in culture sector, and in as a women's rights activist, any group that I could get a hold of. I was working for UN at the time in Iran. And the interesting conclusion that I came to was that actually reformists who were advocating for signing this, they had zero interest in the status of women. For them, women belong to the kitchen, but because it makes us look good to send them to parliament, we send them to parliament. And it's not about whether they change any policies or laws for women. No, it was all about the international community. Look at us and see, look at the number of the women in parliament. This is a sign of progress. So let's go for that. So that was for me also a very clear understanding of reforms in Iran has nothing to do with the quality of life, with the liberty of people, with making any change. It's all about cementing Islamic Republic existence in Iran. During the time that I worked for UN, I was also handed over to intelligence service by UN. They directly sent me to the organization that the wife of Saeed Emami, the Iranians in the group who are sitting here, know he was the one who in the 90s and 2000s executed a lot of Iranians in the country in forms of direct murders and arranging the murders and so on. So I was sent to an organization that his wife was working there and his son was working there and his group were working there. And I got a special star from the intelligence service of Iran and also the IRGC itself. So again, getting into the depths of personal is political in Iran. And it took me quite some time to finish this master because between 2007 and 14, we had also the Iranian, the green movement in Iran, which made it impossible for me to go back. So since then, I've been living here in exile, and to cope with that took me some time. And after giving birth to 2 children, I finished my master's, which I'm very proud of, which helped me to start my PhD at Rotterdam School of Management. And this time I combined everything that I learned during my bachelor's with my master program to focus on how can we develop cross-sector partnerships that are not only impactful, but scalable. And cross-sector partnerships are a form of coalitions, and that's how my research is linked to this conversation. So in my research, I have identified 3 catalysts. One, to make a coalition that is actually lasting and is helping us to move forward. The first one is to recognizing and acknowledging the agencies of our constituencies. So if you are trying to represent the Iranian women in the Iranian people in the Netherlands, we have to respect their agencies as individuals. If you are trying to do it as a whole in diaspora, we need to respect that agency as well. And when we are talking about the people of Iran, we have to also respect that agency. As Puyan mentioned, it's a super diverse group. If we just say all Muslims or all Christians or all Zoroastrians think this way, we are going on the wrong path, basically. The second element is about the configuration of the coalition that we want to put together. If we just say we are selecting this and this and this group, they are going to solve the issue, that's not going to work. We really need to look into the configuration. Who is the lead in forming the coalition? Who is going to be the second party? Who is going to be the one that makes the king, as we say, we use in the Netherlands the term. And this understanding this configuration is of great importance. And if we don't recognize this element, again, we are on the path of failure. And the third one is the complexity. Again, as Puyan and his research has shown, it's very important to have a great understanding of what is the layers and levels of complexity in the coalition that we want to build. There must be, and I emphasize, there must be an alignment between the complexity of the problem that we are trying to address with our coalition and the complexity of the solution that we are providing. We can't solve a wicked problem with a straightforward linear solution. And that's quite important to take into account. So the challenges that we have seen, and also it has come out in my research in terms of what challenges cross-sector partnerships face, is that in majority of cases, sadly, in majority of cases, the members of the party have very different definition of what they mean by partnership. And we can extend it to what do we mean by being part of a coalition, and understanding that definition is superbly important. The next challenge is that even if there is a definition there, it's only one-sided. I only know what is happening in my organization, in my sector, and I have zero information about the other one. And as a result, we are just viewing everything from our own perspective and not putting ourselves in the shoes of the others to see how they are perceiving it. The next challenge is that we fail to recognize the failures. In our reports, in our way of talking, we only talk about our successes. But a path to success is paved by failures. And we really have to see why we failed and recognize them and learn from them. And in many cases, this has gone unrecognized and has become a continuous failing point for cross-sector partnerships and by extension coalition to stay in, not just only stay in relation with each other, but have an impact and scale it. And the last one is the size and the scope of the partnership. Again, it goes back to the definition and understandings that we think we are only building a coalition to address issue A, but actually we had in mind that we want to address issue B and C and D as well, but there was no proper communication about it. And also with the expansion of the scope, the size of the coalition has to also be adjusted and has been missed out. I'm looking at the time, I'm 2 minutes, perfect. And I think to wrap it very quickly as a way forward is that we really have to look at our failures systemically. And this it gets a little bit academic, that we need to make a distinction between systematic review and systemic review. In a systematic review, you're still in the system, and with the system you're reviewing. But when it is systematic, you take a step back, you're out of the system, and then start looking at your own actions and your own activities. So systemic review is the first step that we need to take to make sure that we have a way forward. The second one is to have a guiding coalition, which includes representatives from all parties, all groups that we want to work together in the future. If only a few sit together and say this is the coalition, it's not going to be successful. And the last one is that we write down and greatly discuss not only the vision that we have for our coalition, for our partnership, but also the strategies with which we are going to achieve that vision. So just thinking that we want to get rid of Islamic Republic and move to the next phase, that's really nice, but how and what is the extent of it and what is the next level? Because not wanting something is not equal to wanting something. And with that, I'm gonna step back and look forward to the next speaker's presentation.
Thank you, Mrs. Dehband, for sharing the interesting aspects of your PhD dissertation. Now we would like to invite Mr. Domingos, our final speakers, and he's going to speak about the effects of any changes in Iran on West, the EU, and the Netherlands. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Somaya. Thank you for being here on a Saturday afternoon. And let me thank Nijmegen University as well, even though I'm standing behind persons who look like men, mostly. While we are talking about the woman religion, there is the distinguished speakers, my colleagues. They have done the most difficult, actually, job. They have done the hard work. I just need to build on their propositions. So I have the easy way to say it and to do it. And also, especially thanks to the voluntary organizers of this event. You have done a tremendous job. Thank you. I know that I have 15 minutes, but I do know that you are more interested to listen to Persian music than to what I'm going to say. So I'm going to try to wrap it up in 10 minutes. And then maybe we can have some questions. And maybe we could also give the floor to Dr. Hosseini to finish her presentation. I think it's very interesting, but I'm not going to decide on you. I would not dare. I'm talking about, I'm invited to talk about the impact of the structural change. That's the other word for regime change in Iran. From the international order, from the international perspective, the international order we know since the Second World War. And we Persian, we call it the West. So from the Western point of view. Let me start with the Second World War. Maybe that's the good beginning. It was November 1942, after 3 years during the Second World War, 3 years of struggling against the British, struggling against the Nazi Germany. Mr. Churchill, Winston Churchill, who, as one of the lords called his legacy, the prime minister wins debates after debate and loses battle after battle. That was the situation back then. I mean, you could compare it somehow, of course, it's not comparable, with what's going on with Iran and all the challenges and the fragility that we are witnessing. So Churchill was winning the debates, but losing the battles. In November 1942, one of the most important battles in Egypt, which was the Battle of El Alamein, it was won by the British army. And Churchill had this speech. I don't know whether you know about it. It's called The End of the Beginning. And exactly that speech reminds me of the place we are now concerning Iran. So in his speech in 1942, it's in the house of the mayor in London, he said, this is not the end, meaning the battle against the Nazis after winning the battle in Egypt. This is not the end. This is not the beginning of the end, but this is perhaps the end of the beginning. The end of the beginning. And it's exactly, in my point of view, where we are now at the moment. At the moment, we are in a position that the West, the Europeans, as you know, the Americans, they are wondering what to do with the Islamic Republic and what to do with human rights at one hand and the Iranians in Iran at the other. The European parliaments who are close to the values of the Western societies vote and pass a resolution in Article 11, which firmly says that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is basically the power in Iran, should be designated on the terrorist list. On the other hand, we have the European governments, even the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs yesterday tweeting about it, is not really willing to designate Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. On the other hand, we see that during the last month, where young children, young people, they say that the most demonstrations are under the age of 30, are being killed or executed, actually murdered. The Iran desk official of the US is talking with the Islamic Republic ambassador in New York. So there is politics, there are like real politics, and there are values. And we are in the same position at the moment as history, again, the Churchill was trying to say to people that we should not surrender to the Nazis, we should oppose the Nazis. Halifax, his counterpartner, was trying to push Britain to make some kind of agreement, think about the nuclear agreement with Iran, or try to make an appeasement as a policy. So try to talk with moderates, try to talk with moderate Nazis. You see? I mean, of course, Islamic Republic is not the Nazi Germany. We're not in 1942. I know, but let's just, I mean, I have to say something, isn't it, in 10 minutes? So there is some kind of a correlation between these two. The appeasement policy of the West or confronting the Islamic Republic. And starting with it could be the designation of IRGC as a terrorist organization. It's quite important. Or what we do with the nuclear Iran in the future. Iran is a heartland. I don't know whether you have heard about it. It's a heartland. It has been historically a very, very important factor in the world, in the region. Of course, partly because we Iranians, we like to say that, you know. But I mean, there are some examples that I could share with you. Maybe that it gives some insights. Cyrus the Great, you know all of them. Cyrus the Great. He's actually, and his empire was the first empire in the world. His inspiration, his biography inspired Jefferson in the United States while writing down the Constitution, as we know, the first democratic liberal constitution in the US. The Silk Road. The Silk Road, why it's called Silk Road? A network of trades more than from the 2nd century BC to the 15th century, a network of 7,000 kilometers of trade. It was called Silk Road because the Iranians were quite master in silk. And it is basically the second Silk Road, which is called One Belt, One Road, is the Chinese project to conquer the world. Tehran Conference, 1943, December of 1943. That's why I'm saying it's a heartland. Next to the Iranian way of, you know, say everything is Iranian, there is also a reason to think that. Tehran Conference, 1943. It was the first World War conference in which the big three Allied leaders You know the pictures. They came together and actually ended the Second World War. The Tehran Conference basically is the first conference where the post-World War order, as we call it, the international order, or the power of the West, was formed during that conference. It was envisioned by that conference. Also, for many Iranians, very important, it crystallized that conference in 1943. The international attempts, the international efforts to come up with something like the United Nations. So the United Nations was formed during that conference. And also, of course, Iranians, they had their own take, which there was a protocol that brought up the independence of Iran. Independence has been very important for Iranians, one of the factors of the revolution of 1979. So Tehran Conference, from history to now, on the eve of the second quarter of the 21st century, as we are now. The present revolution, the present revolutionary movement, I have to say as a scholar, in a multipolar world, what does it mean? What does it mean for us? What does it mean for the future? What does it mean for the West? I mean, the speakers talked about it, they spoke about it, they offered their proposition. Woman, life, liberty. Woman, life, liberty. What does it mean? It's a secular movement, as you hear from Puyan. 68%, if I'm not mistaken. It's a secular movement, but it is not anti-religious. That's a very important one. It's a feminist movement, but it's not misogynistic movement. It's not anti-man. It's different than Me Too, you could say. It's the unifying movement that has unifying the decentral networks in Iran, as Dr. Hosseini was trying to explain, in a fragmented identity politics world. Iranians have never been unified as they are now in all the diversities. If you put, like the Jews, 2 Iranians in one room, you have 3 opinions. So woman, life, liberty, which has one message, and it's very Persian. We call it mehr, which calls love. Life, liberty. It's going to change the world if it gets any chance to be successful in the future. But it's fragile. It's difficult. It's very difficult, as Somaya was saying, because there are a lot of dangers. It's difficult to make this fragile movement successful. That's why we need help. So, 12 minutes and 7 seconds. It's a fragile movement. It needs systemic review rather than systematic review, if I'm not mistaken. I started my talk on the end of the beginning. It was not the end, it was not the beginning of the end, but the end of the beginning. It reminds me of the Italian composer Antonio Vivaldi with its 4-season composition, which has a spring as the first part of that composition. I think the woman life freedom movement is fragile as a spring, as Vivaldi has composed it. I hope we could hear it, but maybe we'll hear it during the Persian music. It's very fragile. We are on the spring of this movement, even though we have had a lot of difficulties. And on the spring of this movement, we have 3 seasons to go. It's just the end of the spring of the woman life freedom. So with this, I promise to keep you listening for 10 minutes. It has been more than 10 minutes, 12 minutes, or maybe more. I'm sorry for that. I hope you will enjoy. But I think what we do need is to have hope against despair. There is a struggle between hope and despair at the moment. If you look at European point of view, if you look at from Iranians, there are a lot of pessimistic arguments, narratives in a world of battle of narratives. We need hope against despair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gouris. Now we'll have a 15-minute break. You're welcome to help yourself with tea and coffee downstairs. Please note that the box for donations can be found next to the conference room. We'd like to ask you to please be back here in the conference room at 16:20 sharp, because we'll start our panel discussion right then. Thank you.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I would like to start first with our speakers, and and if you have any missed point in the during the lecture, please share with us. Maybe Dr. Hosseini, you would like to finish your slides.
Yeah, sure. Can I share my screen again?
Yes, please. Yep.
So I would like to just refer to what Sarah Meager, a scholar of violence in war and revolution, points out. She studies, she does research on countries like Latin America, Sudan, Syria, Sri Lanka, and she finds the pattern of sexual violence as instrument of terror in revolutions, not only in war, but in revolutions. And she states that these are, the actions, terror actions that states do to suppress revolutionary movements in their own country against their own citizens, which is on the right, you can see detention, kidnapping, torture, disappearance, mostly of the protesters, and rape, and of course, execution. By this, I mean that we can see all of this in the revolution which is happening in Iran, and these are all the acts that states, the terrorist states do. So by this, we can recognize, we can claim that this Iranian Islamic Republic state is a terrorist state, which makes a terror against the citizens of the country, while it should take care of the citizens. Also a quote which might be inspiring, because when women remove their scarves, indeed they say no to becoming the flag of Islamic Republic of Iran, and with showing their hair, they announce that it is their hair that their flag of revolution. It is a quote from Foucault, resistance, like power, is multiple, and it is formed right at the point where relations of power are exercised. How can citizens of the world support? Continue hearing the voice of women and men in Iran. Share your platforms and resources with them. Stop and push back the regime lobbies. Push your governments to stop negotiating with Islamic Republic as if it is a legitimate state, which it is not. It is a terrorist state. Ask international human rights organizations to use all their means to stop executions in Iran, along with all other terror acts that I mentioned. Acknowledge this is a revolution and support it in any means you have. And of course, get inspired by women life freedom. This might be inspiring. These are the women, 4 women among many other men and women, who lost their eyes in the protest. This is a quote from one of them. She says, "I will keep my hope to see the victorious day with my one eye very soon." Thank you.
Stefan, do you also have something to add? Or?
I shared whatever.
Anyone else? It's now our audience turn to ask questions. Please note that you do not have to introduce yourself. Just let us know from which speaker your question is, and we will ask it, or you can ask it yourself. If you're joining online, please write your questions in the chat box, and the moderators will read them. Thanks.
Have no mercy.
I have a question from Puyan. Thanks for your very informative and interesting presentation. I was wondering to what extent the survey results are representative of the whole population of Iran.
Yeah, that's of course the burning question that I often talk about. I thought this time I'm not going to talk about that, but well, how representative survey results can be tested by comparing them to external data of other survey institutes inside and outside Iran. And that can give you an impression. For example, one external check that we did is to compare with Ethnologue, which is an institute based in America, and they research which languages people speak, and they do quantitative research on that. So for example, for Kurdish people, Ethnologue found that around 6% say that at home they speak Kurdish of the total Iranian population of adults. And so if we weight our data and find, let's say, 1% Kurdish speakers or 10%, we know that that's off. But that's not enough to be representative, because you can have external data being checked for many things, employment rates, what people voted for, and all kinds of checks. And it could be very diverse and could still not be representative. So give you an example, if you are doing a survey in the United States and you have a very diverse sample, it's very well balanced, men, women, all states, all education levels and so on, but they all voted Democrat, then it's not going to be representative, right? So for us, it's a challenge to get, especially it's a challenge to get respondents who voted for Raisi, right? And that is really important in the weighting that we do, to see, you know, what is the share of people who voted for Raisi. And we try to gather data from people who voted, for example, people who voted for Raisi or other hard-to-reach groups, for example, people in rural areas. We try to get samples from them in different ways. One way that is very effective is the use of Siphon, which is a very much used VPN software in Iran. So for example, the February 2022 survey was shared on Siphon. So when people connect to the internet on their phone, they might see a survey link. So in that one in February, Siphon spread the link to 620,000 people inside Iran. That's a lot. And then you get also some samples from, for example, harder to reach groups like people in Baluchistan, or I don't know, women in rural areas and so on. Yeah, and that is, let's say, if you then look at the weighting and the results, and I'll stop because it's a very complicated issue, but if you look at the weighting then, you can interpret the extent to which it can be said to be representative, and you always have to be careful with doing that. But I'm confident that this is the best we have. This is the best available data that exists. To give you an example, in December, when we did the survey that the results will be published in 10 days, we also asked people about which health insurance they have. So you have different types of health insurance. Let's say it's a neutral question. It's not a very politically charged question, which health insurance you have. And one of these is a health insurance for armed forces. And we even have those samples. So we have, let's say, Iranian official data on the armed forces and which health insurance they have and how many %, and then we compare that with our data. So each time we try to expand the external checks. It's never going to be perfect, but I think it's the best that we could get in the circumstances. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Tamimi. Also, I would like to read a question from our online participants. The first part was the first lie. You say only 32% are Shia, while even BBC says that Iran has the largest Shia majority, with more than 66 million, making up nearly 90% of the population. How do you elaborate on it?
That's a great question. So I heard the name of Michel Foucault today. When Michel Foucault went to Iran after the Islamic Revolution, he came back to France. He wrote some articles in which he wrote down also the statistics. He wrote down that Iran has a 95% or something like that Shia population. Then after the revolution, some academics started working on Iran in the 1990s, published books by University of California Press, in the early 2000s by Harvard University, for example, famous sociologist Charles Kurtzman published about Iran, also said, 95% Shia population. And then World Value Survey in 2020 went to Iran and they did face-to-face interview. And they also found 98% self-identified Muslim population. Now, obviously, this doesn't match with the experience that Iranians have. And it doesn't match with the qualitative data that we have about Iran, which indicates that they are becoming more secular. And the problem is that the way the data on Iranians' religiosity was gathered, it does not sufficiently guarantee their anonymity in a theocratic context, so people don't answer honestly. And there are other data, not survey data, that can give us hints that there is something changing, right? For example, one that I really like is the Islamic Republic's official data on baby names. And so, what name did people give their baby? And then if you look at the data, that this is the data of this, not survey data, this is just real data from the Islamic Republic themselves. Each year they would publish that, Muhammad was the most popular name for boys, or Fatima was the most popular one for girls. But if you put them together in a graph, you see a massive decline, right? So after 2017, they stopped publishing this data. I think that's enough.
Okay, here in the hall, if you have any questions, please. Yeah, that part.
Oh, sorry. I have a question for Ms. Derman. I was wondering, how do you negotiate the dynamic between agency and structure? Because you made a suggestion about agency, but I think it's very hard to talk about agency in such an oppressive space. And I think it's very important to talk about it, but I think it's also very difficult because how do you claim your agency when you're oppressed?
Thank you for your question. The information that I provided is not context specific. So when it comes to under pressure and being suppressed and then talk about your agency, it's just that's not going to work. The context that this information has been gathered is for organizations, for groups that can freely choose what they want to do and what form of collaboration they want to develop. It's not, and the approach that I was sharing with you is about mainly about the people, the Iranian opposition in diaspora, that they are trying now to, in the context of transitioning to a new domain, a new era. And for that transition part, what do they need to do? And that's respecting the agency of different groups. So in that context, recognizing the agency of constituencies is of great importance. And the method that I use for my research is called necessary condition analysis. It means that you have to have these conditions, otherwise you fail. It doesn't guarantee that you succeed, but it's definitely not having them a guarantee of failure. So that's where it comes from.
Also a question from our online participants for Ms. Dehban. In a traditional Iranian home, a woman holds higher status. She is accorded rights, she is heard, and she is not treated as a commodity, unlike many other countries, including in the Muslim world. Do you have any comments on this?
I would like this person to define traditional. What do they mean by traditional? Is it, I'm just going to speculate from here, do you mean by traditional that that the father is the man is the head of the house, and the mother is the one who makes the house a home, so to say? Or is it that's like looking at Game of Thrones style, that the mother decides what the king is going to be? Or what is, you need to define the word traditional. So what does that specifically mean? And if we make the assumption that one person is making all the decisions, whether it's only a woman, mother making the decision, or the father making all the decisions, either way, it's not good. So that's not what I'm preaching or advocating in any way or form.
In fact, this person has mentioned, contrary to what you hear in the Western media, many Iranian women hold key positions in the field of politics and policy making. More than 1,000 women serve as judges to administer justice.
Yeah, I would very much like to answer to that question. The women who went to the parliament in the past decades, they are the women who voted to reverse some of the laws that were in favor of women to make it against women. To give an example, the women who went to the parliament, they collectively initiated and decided that a man, if he wants to have more than one wife, he doesn't have to ask for the permission of the first wife or the second or the third or the fourth. They can just have it as they want it. These are the women who are in key political positions and helping and advising women on how they should live their lives. And yes, these are the women of the party who are not there to change the status of women, but are there to push the agenda of the Islamic Republic as they want it. And as I said, based on the research I did for my master's thesis, that they do believe that, yes, women are we call it the crown of our head and on our head, and we have to praise them as long as they stay in the kitchen and keep the food warm when we come home. And by we here, I'm referring to the men. And because it makes us look better towards the international community, we put them in the position of power in the parliament or assign them. This doesn't mean that there are women who are having high-level, high-ranked jobs who got it out of, not out of their own merits. There are women, but whether they are representative of all women in Iran, I highly doubt it. So again, based on my own research, if a woman is in a highly ranked position in political sense, in the political context, it's merely there to push the agenda of Islamic Republic.
Yes, just please yourself.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. So I have 3 questions actually. As many of Iranians who are in the hall today, they know that one of the major concerns we have is that the current revolutionary movement is going to be maybe towards a direction that we are not hoping for and aiming for, which is definitely a democratic society and democratic government. And looking into the past 1979 revolution, basically it's, it's a very valid case, because of course at that time we were all also hoping for something else. So my first question is maybe for Puyan. Based on the data, how real is this threat or this fear that we all experiencing at this moment? My second question is for Somalia, because I just wonder how can we minimize the chance of, not getting the success out of what we are now all trying for, and we do our best definitely, but still, what would be your suggestion to minimize the risk? And my final question, if there was some time, is for Dr. Hosseini, because definitely the role of women at this moment of time, at least in my opinion, is one of the factors that may minimize actually losing this revolution as we did in 1979. So how would you look at this argument? Thank you so much.
Well, the first question, that's quite a difficult question. I'm not sure if I am capable to answer it. I think that if you ask about data, our data shows that people express certainly the hope that they will succeed. So maybe we know that Iranians in the past have gone through, waves of feeling hope, without hope, and then with hope again. And in the survey, they express the hope that they think that something this time is different, right? That this sentiment, I think, exists, that something has changed, that won't be so easy to undo that, right? So the genie is out of the bottle, as it were. And then in this process, but that is not really based on data. It's more my personal view. I think it's important, that's what I tried to say in the talk, that the let's say romanticism of the revolution that people experience, that the kind of common bonds and so on. It was fascinating to see the data results, to see that in comparison with all other surveys that we did, people indicate that they find friends in their personal life very important, more so than in all our other surveys. So there is this sense of people coming together. But in that, let's say, in the revolutionary, let's say, romanticism can also result in situations where we lose, let's say, the respect for those who don't entirely fit into the main groups, and we lose maybe attention for individual, let's say, civil liberties. And so I think it will be a challenge to maintain that focus on unity and to respect, individuals who, for whatever reason, think differently or belong to a smaller group and so on. I don't know if that sufficiently answers the question, but yeah, that's one tension that I think is important. Yeah.
To answer your question on how to minimize the risk, my starting point is the word transparency. All the parties who are in one way or another are trying to represent fragments of Iran, parts of Iranians in opposition. They need to be a lot more transparent about their standpoints, about their intentions, about their definitions. As I mentioned, it's one of the major challenges that we talk about coalition, but what do we mean by that? What is the expectation from this coalition? There is this campaign now going on, Man vekalat midaham, what is the English? I give
advocating.
I give the power to this person or that person. What does that really mean? To what extent am I giving the power to this person? Is it for the next 2 months? Is it for the next 2 years? Is it for making decision A and not decision B? That needs to be a lot more transparent and a lot more open. How
do we make a selection of people to go and visit Macron, for instance, or in our own Netherlands, how do we make the decision who goes to visit Prime Minister Rutte and or visit the Queen Maxima? How did we come to this selection? And the transparency behind it is the key to build the trust among the diaspora, among the opposition who is in the diaspora. And we are in an open environment. We have a free choice. And if we, without free choice, are not capable of fully being transparent, then I don't think we can set a good example for the Iranians inside Iran who are putting their lives on the line to set up a coalition, to move towards a different system. That then it's just not gonna work. So my first point is for this to move forward and minimize the risk is being transparent and communicate how you are making selections for certain processes and setting up these different types of campaigns.
Fantastic answer. Thank you so much.
Dr. Hosseini, are you ready for the question? The answer question?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, what I think we should do to minimize the risk as long as women are concerned is to like develop and take good care of a collective consciousness, which I can say feminist consciousness, and it is not just about women. It is women's issues are not just women's issues, it is men's issues also. Protesters in Iran have proved that men, and women are all together fighting for equality, for freedom. So we have to remind ourselves, I mean, the women have to fight, continue fighting, men have to remind themselves and practice seeing where women are getting erased. I mean, there is a word in socio-linguistics, there is this term erasure, which means refers to when you delete a word like woman from text, that goes into the deletion of actual women in actual society. So we have to remind ourselves, if there is a platform, are we do make sure that we are sharing it with women, I mean men, share it with women. If there is a platform, if there is a resource, if there is leadership, if there is a conversation, all the time we expect men to just check once more time or double check to make sure women's voice is there, feminist voice is there, because this is the essence of our revolution, and patriarchy is what men and women in Iran are all fighting against. So yeah, I feel like a feminist view, women view is something that we should share with men.
Thank you. Maybe an open question. So I'm asking all our 4 speakers today. Can decide who is going to answer it. The Republic of Iran promotes equality, freedom, and social justice between people, social classes, and gender. There is no clash between Islam and women's rights, contrary to distorted media reports. Islam does not imprison women, but liberates them. Westerns attempt to export freedom. Women's rights and democracy have proved disastrous, as can be seen in places such as in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Interesting that these guys are watching.
Universiteit.
Dalman, would you want to answer?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So, yeah, it's very interesting that they are watching us and listening to us. Actually, I made this note to react on one of the questions, which was answered perfectly by Somaya, about the position of women in power. I really wonder whether Iranian women have ever been in position of power in Iran. Never. What is power in Iran? According to the Constitution of Islamic Republic, the power is crystallized in one person. Who is that person? The supreme leader. everything in the constitution is based on election, blah, blah, by the rule of the supreme leader. So women have never been in a position of power. You can see on the fact that wearing a hijab is not voluntary. Women have been in the position of cosmetic apologizing for the paternalistic regime and probably culture, which is vanishing now, the paternalism. So women have never been in a position of power. That's one. Women are not invited to be part of the IRGC, army, become president, even though there's no elections there, become a supreme leader. They do apply for becoming a member of the parliament, if I'm not mistaken. So talking about the position of power, I mean, the followers of the regime, and I'm happy I'm delighted that they are listening to us. Maybe they can learn some, not from me, but from my colleagues. They have all these one-liners and fallacies to try to use the Western, the liberal way of thinking to exactly what Mr. Zarif did in the past 20 years, to actually apologize for the Ayatollahs. It doesn't work anymore, guys. It actually reminds me of how the Europeans are sanctioning IRGC and the Islamic Republic. It's basically the same. Talking about the woman in a position of power in the Islamic Republic is the same as the influence of the sanctions of the EU on the regime. So what does EU do? That's something I know a little bit more about. The EU sanctions the Islamic Republic, has been sanctioning the Islamic Republic based on two pillars. One is a travel ban, and the other one is an asset freeze. All right? That's the basic thing. And then they have different kind of tactics to do. Travel ban, asset freeze. Just imagine a member of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps being not able to enjoy the Mediterranean at the Amalfi Coast in the summer. Is that painful?
Or Ibiza.
Or Ibiza, or not being able to go to the ATM and get money because he's sanctioned of the asset freeze in the Swiss Alps. It's crazy to, actually it's a little bit sad to think that this kind of sanctions is gonna work, isn't it? It's the same way of using cosmetics to show women in Iran who are not in power, who are submitted even to wear a scarf, and then talk about these kind of fallacies. So I'm delighted that they're listening, but I'm afraid this kind of fallacies is not going to work.
If I may just add to what Damun mentioned, specifically to the group who is watching, and they believe that Republic of Iran, they even dropped the Islamic part. So Islamic Republic of Iran is haven for women. If that's how you feel about it, good for you. And if you are saying this because you're forced, because this is where your money is coming from, the people of Iran who are in the streets fighting for their lives, their arms are open for you to give up what you are doing. And there is amnesty for you. You can still turn and stand on the right side of the history. You can still join the people in the streets and be one of the Iranians who are going to continue living in Iran. So I'm sorry for you that you have to do these things, but there is still room to be an Iranian and live like an Iranian inside Iran without the privileges that IRGC and the Islamic Republic is specifically providing for you. And thank you for listening.
Yes.
Dr. Hosseini, would you like to add something here?
I mean, we were talking about sometimes like sharing of the voice of women. I wish the people who are claiming that women in Iran have enough of power, just make sure that women in Iran have enough of free and working internet and the freedom to join the panels like this and have their own voice, speak for themselves. You know, these are very basic ABC things to do. First, start with why internet is closed to many Iranian women and men. It is to delete their voice, right? And then when you make sure, I mean, you, the person who claims that Iranian women have enough of power, when you make sure the women's voice can be heard in Iran and outside Iran, Iranian women can speak for themselves. For now, you are cutting their voice.
Can I add something? Yeah. If you can recall, I was talking about the Second World War and the war between Churchill and the Nazis, etc. There was a time that the West, as we call it, really hoped that there was going to be some kind of moderation in Iran, that there would be a reform, that there is no black and white, that there is no dichotomy between the regime and the state. There was a hope, and they invested. We have invested. Iranian people have invested for more than 25 years with this kind of arguments and propositions as you hear, and there are a lot. One of the champions is Zarif, the other champion is Trita Parsi and alike. We have also this kind of champions in the Netherlands. I'm not going to talk about it. The champions who write pieces in the NRC and propose that the Dutch government should not support the delisting of the Islamic Republic from the Women Commission of the United Nations. It was the official line in the letter of Foreign Minister, Mr. Hoekstra, on 24th of November, because of this kind of arguments. Because if we do not have Iran on the Women Commission, the Islamic Republic, then we will close down the dialogue. And if we will not have dialogue, they will not reform. So there was hope for reform until 24th of November. Things has changed since. Now Mr. Hoekstra is basically implicitly saying that he's willing to put IRGC on the terror list. Things has changed, ladies and gentlemen, outside. I'm happy you're watching. It doesn't work anymore. Reform is dead. This kind of argument is not going to work. So I would listen to somebody who has a lot of experience and knowledge to just join the people instead of making this kind of fallacies.
Thank you. Question from our audience, and we have also 2 questions in the chat, so please.
Yeah, thank you. Let me stand up, because that's for the people who are listening and watching us. I just stand up and I say my name is Rouzbeh Daneshvar, and we are not afraid anymore.
Sorry, I interrupt you.
I'll ask my question.
There is no, oh yeah, because there's no camera on.
All right, okay. Yeah. But
just
note my name. It's an open question for the panelists. You mentioned Holland. You mentioned the coalition and council and all these things which are engaging us last couple of days also about this online petition who is engaging, I don't know, 90 million Iranians. My specific question is to you guys also, and about our small country on speaker lunch. What steps, movements are happening here in Holland to make some moves in Holland between the prominent Dutch Iranians like you? We have Mrs. Karimi, we have Qureshi, we have Elian. I mean, we have Qadir Abdullah. If you know all those guys, what's happening here in Holland to make this small move in our own country? Thank you.
May I start? Well, so in this sense, I'm actually quite optimistic. I think we have booked some progress. First of all, is a group of about 20 Iranian, Dutch, and Iranian, let's say, professors who are based in Dutch universities, together with several rectors of Dutch universities, signed a statement in support of people in Iran, which is the first time, in my experience, living in the Netherlands, that really like people on the left and right side of the political spectrum were willing to, you know, sign something together. And I also see this in the different meetings, for example, not just with Rutte, but also, yeah, you mentioned Farah Karimi, and we visited a few days ago Sjoerd Sjoerdsma from D66 and Sophie Hermans from VVD. And there are some results. So, for example, Sophie Hermans, together with Gert-Jan Segers, they published a statement signed by 10 fractievoorzitters in the Volkskrant, that, you know, Dutch politicians believe that we should support the Iranian people and we should pressure the Iranian regime. And that in itself, that, you know, 10 important Dutch politicians of different political parties, left and right, support this, I think is progress. It's not perfect, right? So sometimes I think that there is a kind of, I think you were alluding to that, there's not quite a good balance between, maybe sometimes some groups are more prominent than others in these meetings, and that's not good. But there are talks with different groups, also with minorities. So not just left and right, but also, for example, you know, for example, Kurds, who of course played an important role in these last months. Yeah, so in that sense, I think it's pretty good. And I think also that you see a shift, as Damon says, where Hoekstra first, when some Iranian ladies, including my wife, visited Queen Maxima, Hoekstra didn't want the picture to become public, right? So he was very adamant that, you know, it's fine if you visit Maxima, but no picture, right? No public expression of support from the Dutch monarchy. And he was also a bit like, yeah, do we really need to remove the Islamic Republic from the UN Women's Rights Commission? But now you see that he really changed, right? And that change is because of pressure coming from Iranians, left and right, who unify in their demands to pressure the Islamic Republic. And of course, in the Netherlands, for example, if the Dutch population cares, Dutch politicians are going to care more. Right? So it shouldn't be just the kind of thing that Iranians do. And in that sense, I think it's not that bad, actually. Yeah.
Also, a question for Dr. Tamimi from our.
Yeah, let me add, because it's a very important question. Thank you, Mr. Daneshvar, wasn't it? Yes. So what you see not only in the Netherlands, but also in the US and in European Union, there is a gap, and I'm very happy about it, between the executive part of the Europe, of the Netherlands, of the US, and the legislative part. In other words, there is a difference between the government, the diplomacy, and the parliaments, the people. What we see is that the parliaments, EU, Netherlands, is willing to list the IRGC, for example, as a terrorist organization, or to do a lot of things, to organize. There is a motion passed before Christmas. And just imagine that I see a number of them here, and I'm delighted that Puyan is one of my colleagues in that regard. There is a diversity of Iranian Dutch, Netherlands, Iranian Dutch diaspora, working together to put the pressure on different levels. There are different groups. They're different groups. They don't fight. I mean, there are disagreements, you know, 2 Iranians, 3 opinions, but a lot of push. So, and it works. Before Christmas, there were a few motions by PvdA, by Christian Union, by different kind of groups to, for example, organize a group of diaspora talking with the government. So the mandate or the responsibility is not to the government. But this gap is very important. This gap between the parliaments and the executive bodies is an important gap. So if you ask me whether the gathering in Strasbourg of 16th of November, was it more important to gather this Monday in Brussels, where there is a seat by the Foreign Affairs European Council? That means it's a meeting between the foreign ministers of European Union. I would say this Monday would have been more important. Iran is part of the roundtable questions, but it's not the main question. So you understand there is a difference. Netherlands is a third trade partner in the European Union for Islamic Republic, third, with about $500 million euros of trade per year at this moment. The question is that we have to ask the government, the Dutch government, is how do you do trade with Iran if the banks are sanctioned by the US? How is it working? I mean, of course, we understand the Dutch cows are quite popular in Iran. But how does it work? Another thing is that the ICC is an important part, International Criminal Court. There is this motion by Mrs. Farah Karimi in the Senate. Before Christmas, it's not voted on. It's parked, in my way of saying it, to be voted on in the next few weeks, where Iran can be, and then you will see the signaling from the advisor of National Security Council in the US, Mr. Jack Sullivan, who said Iran is doing the same as Russia, the Islamic Republic is doing the same as Russia in Ukraine as the war crimes. So in that sense, with ICC, there are difficulties though, but we could push from that as well. So there is a lot of, I mean, we have 50,000 Iranians, I think, in the Netherlands, but our pushing is going to help. There is also the other side of the coin, which is the media, the Dutch media. Unfortunately, the Dutch media is quite apologistic to the regime. What I mean is that they try to, let's say, focus on despair instead of hope. They focus on regime is too strong. They focus on there is no opposition group. They focus on there is no alternative. They focus on if there's no Islamic Republic, it's going to be chaos. It's going to be civil war. This is the, let's say, the playbook, as we hear of some of the questions, by the regime, amplified by the actors, whether intentionally or unintentionally, they are doing the same narratives, amplifying the same narrative to keep the regime and to keep the status quo. And that's exactly what we can do as Iranian in the Netherlands.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Goriz. And I apologize for those of you who couldn't answer questions, but I promise if you email us to iranevent2023@gmail.com, we'll send them to our speakers, and I hope our speakers can also promise to answer them.